Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, true crime video story, true crime corner video, blah. So today, I'm Jennifer, aka Jen Jen. Today, we're going to talk about, now, I've never done one of these, and I just happened by this one by chance. It's called the Wanda Beach Murders, and this takes place in Australia. This took place in Australia, sorry. And this happened back in 1965. Now, I wasn't intending to find this one. Don't ask me how. I don't even remember how I found it. I just was like doing a Google search and this one came up. So this is going to be interesting because I've never covered one from 1965. Never talked about one from way back when. So, well, actually, no, that's not true. I did the Kathy Chesnick one. Okay. Now, like I said, this takes place in Sydney, Australia. It's called the Wanda Beach Murders, or as they can be simply referred to is Wanda. They are unsolved murders of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sherrock at Wanda Beach near Corner-Wanda in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Yeah. There you go. On January the 11th of 1965. The victims were age 15 and were best friends and neighbors from the suburb of West Ryde, and their partially covered bodies were discovered the next day. The brutal nature of the slayings and the fact that they occurred on a deserted, wind-swept beach brought a lot of publicity to the case. By April 1966, police had interviewed 7,000 people, making it the largest investigation in Australian history. So you can imagine, this is one of the most, it's one of the unsolved cases, but apparently this is one of the most infamous unsolved Australian murder cases in the 1960s in Australia. And it's New South Wales' oldest unsolved homicide case. Wow. Like I said, I've never done this before. I've never done one of these before. So we're going to go with this. Marianne Schmidt had arrived in Melbourne, Victoria, with her family from West Germany in September of 1958. And at the time, the Schmidt family consisted of the parents, Helmut and Elizabeth, and her siblings, Helmut Jr., Hans, Peter, Trixie, and Wolfgang. Another child, Norbert, was born the following year. And after they arrived in Australia, the Schmidt family lived in a migrant hostel in Unadera, New South Wales, before settling in Temora. In 1963, Helmut Schmidt moved the family to Sydney after contracting Hodgkin's disease, and they found a home in West Ryde. In June of the next year, Mr. Smith had died. Marianne's next door neighbor was Christine Sherrock, and she lived with her grandparents, Jim and Jeanette Tague. Sherrock's father had died in 1953, and her mother, Beryl, remarried and was living in the northwestern Sydney suburb of Seven Hills. Now, Christine had moved in with her grandparents by choice when the Schmidts arrived next door. She had developed a very strong friendship with Marianne, who was also the same age. It was not known why Christine had preferred to live with her grandparents, and not her, to live with her grandparents, or and not with her mother and her stepfather. That has never really come out. On now, the January 1965, Christine and Schmidt visited the beach at Corner-Wanda, which had been a popular picnic spot for the Schmidt family. Diary entries had indicated that after the murders, read after the murders that indicated the girls had kissed some boys at the beach that day. The following day, the Schmidt children had visited the beach without Sherrock. Meanwhile, Mrs. Schmidt had been admitted to a hospital for a major operation, leaving Helmut Jr. and Marianne in charge of the household. On Saturday, January the 9th, Schmidt and Sherrock asked Mrs. Schmidt, who was still hospitalized, if they could take the younger children to Corner-Wanda the next day, and were given permission. However, it rained, so they couldn't go. On Monday, July 11th, they were accompanied by Schmidt's 4 youngest siblings. The girls set off again by train for Corner-Wanda rail station after transferring to Redfern. They had arrived at 11 a.m., but it was windy and the beach was closed. The group then walked down the southern end of the beach and sheltered among the rocks. 8-year-old Wolfgang still wanted to swim, so Schmidt went with him to a shallow part of the surf away from the rocks. After they returned to the group, they had a picnic. And at some point during all this, the picnic and whatever, Christine left the others and went off by herself. When Sherrock returned to the group, they decided to go for a walk into the sandhills behind Wanda Beach. At around 1 p.m., the group had reached a point around 400 meters beyond the Wanda Surf Club, and they had stopped to take shelter behind a sandhill as the younger children were complaining about the conditions. Well, of course, God grief, it's raining, it's windy, and you're walking in, all this sand. Schmidt told her younger siblings that she and Sherrock would return to the rocky beach at the south end of the beach where they had hidden their bags, then return to fetch the children and head home. Instead, the girls continued into the sandhills. When Peter told them they were going the wrong way, they laughed at him and walked on. The Schmidt children had remained waiting behind the sandhill until 5 p.m., at which time they went and collected their bags, including Schmidt's and Sherrock's purses, and went home on the last train. Arriving home around 8 p.m., Schmidt and Sherrock were reported missing at 8:30 p.m. by Sherrock's grandmother. The next morning, on Tuesday, January the 12th, Peter Smith was taking 3 young nephews for a walk through the Wanda Beach sandhills, some distance north of the Wanda Surf Club. He discovered what appeared to be a store mannequin buried face down in the sand. But when he brushed away the sand from the head, he realized that it was a body, and the police were called from the surf club. At this point, Smith believed he had found only one young woman, which I'm trying to understand. Why would you go out to these sand? I don't know anything about this part of the, but I'm looking at him, and these hills are not really. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, when the scene was examined, Schmidt was found lying on her right side with her left leg bent. Sherrock was face down, her head against the sole of Schmidt's left foot. Both had scratch marks on her face. And they think from that there was a long drag mark leading to the scene. And the police determined that Sherrock had fled, possibly while Schmidt was dying, only to have been caught, incapacitated, and then dragged back to the body of her friend. There was an intensive search to find the murder weapon, which was a long knife and some sort of blunt instrument, but they never found it. Tons of sand from around the murder scene were shifted through, and there were various items that were found. There was a blood-stained knife blade, but police weren't able to link it to the girl's murders. The autopsy for Sherrock found a BAC blood alcohol level of 0.015, but alcohol was not found in Schmidt's autopsy. It was discovered that Sherrock had consumed food, cabbage and celery, possibly a Chico roll, that was different from the rest of the party. It was suspected that this occurred while she was alone. Sherrock's skull had been fractured by a blow to the back of the head, and she had been stabbed 14 times. Schmidt's throat had been deeply slashed, and she had been stabbed 6 times. Talk about... okay. Their underwear had been cut, and attempts had been made to rape both of the girls. Semen had been found, but the autopsy showed that their hymens were intact, so they didn't rape them. Schmidt's brother Hans had, well, I guess you could say they did, sorry. Schmidt's brother Hans had viewed photos of her body and said she had been stabbed 25 to 30 times. She had almost been decapitated because her throat had been cut so viciously. That's just... okay. Now, what else I find interesting is that it was also during Sherrock's absence that Wolfgang noticed a teenage boy hunting crabs. Later, he claimed to have seen the same boy twice more, once in the company of his sister and Sherrock, and again sometime much later walking alone. There has been doubt about his description of this person, as Wolfgang's testimony over time variously suggested he had a homemade spear gun, a fishing knife, or both. The last official sighting of the girls was around 12:45 by local fireman Donnie Dostine, who was walking in the area with his son and saw the girls walking about 800 yards north of the surf club. Dostine told the police that they seemed to be hurrying, and one of the girls often looked behind her as if they were being followed. He did not see anybody else, and there had been a number of people seen in the area who were never identified and had never come forward. Their funerals were held on January the 20th, and then there was a $10,000 reward, but it was later I don't know what Australian currency is, but it was posted in February, and it was later converted to $20,000 in 1966, which stood unchanged as of August 2002. So there's still the same amount. In 1966 of April, the coroner handed down its report, by which time police had interviewed 7,000 people. That's a lot of people to interview, which made it the largest investigation in Australian history. Despite this, the murders became a cold case, and none of the main three suspects fit the description of the surfer youth who has never been identified. The case was then reopened in 2002, or 2000, and February 12th, 2012, they announced the New South Wales Police Force, case unit announced that a weak male DNA sample had been extracted from a pair of white shorts that were worn by Sherrock. While admitting the current technology wasn't able to provide more information, the police were confident that future advances would give more assistance. In July of 2014, police said that a semen sample taken from Schmidt's body had been lost and could not be located despite an extensive search. Now, there were two suspects that were looked at for this, but again, they never could prove, his name was Seek Johnson. He was a former detective who had investigated the murders and was given a painting in 1975 by Alan Bassett. Alan Bassett had been jailed for murdering Caroline Orphan, a 19-year-old woman, on the night of Saturday, June 11th, 1966. And she was attacked, raped, and strangled, and then had her skull crushed with a rock. On the night of her murder, Caroline went out for a night with her friends to the Iron Workers Club on Crown Street, where she met Bassett. Now, he was sent to prison for life. He served 29 years before being released in 1995. The painting was titled A Bloody Awful Thing, showed an abstract landscape. Johnson believed the painting showed blood trails, a broken knife blade, and the body of a victim, and became convinced that Bassett was the Wanda Beach killer. He also became convinced that it showed a scene from the murders that only the killer would know, as well as clues to the also unsolved murders of Kruger and Dowling Co. Despite skepticism of other detectives, Johnson wrote a book about the case. Before it could be published, he was killed in an accident. Other detectives, while retaining professional respect for him, concluded that he was wrong in his belief. Now, there was one person Johnson had convinced, and he was a Daily Mirror crime reporter, Bill Jenkins. Now, he repeated Johnson's claims in his ghostwritten memoirs as crime goes by, devoting a whole chapter to the Wanda Beach murders. Most of the chapter was essentially a repeat of what he had written in his earlier book, Crime Reporter, but he mentioned Johnson, Bassett, and the painting as well. Bassett commenced proceedings for defamation in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, which he was entitled to do after the attainder rule was abolished by the Felons Act in 1981. I know this is a lot of freaking jumbo. Sorry. Although, now, mind you, this guy has a history of mental illness. Although he has this history of mental illness, the proceedings were commenced by the Protective Commissioner as his tutor after a ruling on the form and capacity of the imputations. The publisher pleaded defenses of justification, Bassett being the convicted murderer, and the proceedings never went further. Since his release, Bassett has voluntarily given a DNA sample to clear his name, but whether or not he has been eliminated as a suspect, we don't know yet. Now, the second suspect is Christopher Wilder. 2 years prior to the Wanda Beach murders, he had been convicted of a gang rape on a Sydney beach, which led police to include him as a suspect. He emigrated to the United States in 1969, where he embarked on a series of serial killings in the early 1980s. Well, okay, that's one way. While visiting his parents in 1982 in Australia, he was charged with sexual offenses against two 15-year-old girls for whom he had forced to pose nude. He fled back to the United States, and in the first half of 1984, he committed 8 murders, attempted several more, and he accidentally killed himself during a struggle with the police in New Hampshire on April 13th, 1984. I mean, seriously? How do you accidentally kill yourself when you're struggling with the police? That makes no sense to me. Really? Okay. I don't know. Now, there's a third suspect. Now, I only knew of 2, but there's a third. A third was not well publicized until 1998, as Derek Percy, who had been imprisoned since 1969 for the murder of a child on a beach in Victoria. Percy was considered too dangerous to be released and is the prime suspect for a number of murders of prime suspect for a number of other murders of children in Melbourne and in Sydney, and he died in 2013 from cancer. He was considered a leading suspect for the Wanda Beach murders by the police. While Percy can be linked to the location on the date of the murders, there were no other links that were found. It was hoped that he would just, come out and confess on his deathbed, but that never happened. Possible case. Now, there are 2 possible linked cases to what happened to the 2 girls. 2 far less well-known murders also occurred in 1966, which police have at the time speculated might have been connected to the Wanda Beach killer. September the 29th, January 1966, Saturday, January 29th, 1966. A 56-year-old cleaning lady named Wilhelmina Kruger was killed in Piccadilly Center on Crown Street in Wollongong. Her body was discovered around 5:45 a.m. at the foot of the basement level stairs by a butcher who had arrived for work. Having been first assaulted 3 floors above, probably around 4:30, she had been brutally dragged down the escalators and the stairs. She was then strangled and stabbed, mutilated, and found naked from the chest down. They also found cigarette burns in her clothing. A blonde hair was found at the scene, and in the time prior to the murder, Kruger had become nervous that someone had been watching her and had driven to work, and her partner had driven her to work. Similarly, the lights in the car park within the center had shown recent signs of being tampered with, and they had been tampered with again on the morning of the murder. A major clue came during the investigation that a witness who lived near the center was waiting at the gate of his property for the morning newspaper to be delivered, and reported seeing a vehicle speeding nearby at around 4:55 on the day of the murder. The witness described the vehicle as a crusty, cream-colored utility, possibly a Holden or a Chevy type model, with plywood canopy attached to the rear of the vehicle. The witness had managed to give a description of the driver as a tall, lean male of a disheveled appearance. The report was corroborated by 2 couples visiting from Victoria who were staying at the Piccadilly Center's motel, who asked a male about local accommodation shortly before Kruger's murder. The group also stated that they heard the sound of a vehicle speeding away from the Piccadilly Center shortly after the murder. The group's description of the male they spoke matched the witness's description of the male he saw that was speeding away from, Piccadilly shortly after Kruger's murder. The couple also stated that he was driving a vehicle that also matched the witness description of the vehicle. Around 2, now the next one is around midnight on Wednesday, February the 16th, 1966, a 27-year-old shop assistant and prostitute from Bondi named Anna Tuscovia Dalinkoa went missing after leaving the taxi club in King's Cross. 10 days later, at 5:30 p.m. on February the 26th, her semi-naked, strangled, stabbed, and mutilated body was found by a truck driver who had stopped at the side of Old Illawarra Road in Menai to change a tire. Most of her clothes and belongings were missing, and drag evidence showed that her body had been moved to a more visible location around 3 to 4 days prior to discovery. This was like it's like this person wanted their body to be found, which really I don't understand. The police immediately linked her body to brutal Jack the Ripper-like murder with that of Kruger, and the investigators from that crime were called in to assist. They believed that the murder might have been the work of the Wanda Beach killer, primarily based on circumstantial evidence and similarities. So you can see, it just, yeah. Now, in both of the murders of Kruger and of Dalinkoa, police believed that the killer was taunting them. In the Kruger murder, a witness calling himself as Gary had given a statement that he and his girlfriend were sitting in his car parked in Railway Square directly behind the Piccadilly Center, where he saw the utility pulling in to the square sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m. on the morning of the murder. Gary also stated that the vehicle circled Railway Square 3 times before turning back onto Gladstone Avenue and parking opposite the Piccadilly Center. Police checks revealed that no such person existed on any record, and the address that Gary had given the detectives was false. So was he the one that committed these crimes, or was he just... It's a good question. Now, the media, these murders are, like I said, these murders are still unsolved. They, but they have been, seen on different, things, like the murders. They were like Crimes Investigation of Australia. There was a book called Wanda, The Untold Story of the Wanda Beach Murders by Alan J. Whitaker. There's a podcast, and it's called Case File True Crime Podcast. And there's, there's really not much to this whole thing. I mean, my whole thing is, okay, why it's got to be one person, and but yet we don't know who he is. And so this is kind of, one of those things. I just was really like kind of, into this, because it was just like, okay, I've never done one from Australia. So that's that one, guys. I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all next time. Thank you for watching, and thank you for subscribing.